Mr. President, I rise today after 10 years in the Senate, when I have endured speech after speech after speech on this floor, claiming that the Republican Party is the party of fiscal discipline. It is a politics that created something during the depths of the worst recession called the Tea Party, that were rallying all over America to stop what they said was runaway spending. When I got here, I actually believed that the Republican Party was a fiscally responsible party, that there was some principle behind it. Today, I know better. I was naive. It is all about politics. There have been 5 budget deals since 2013 between the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, and whoever happened to be in the White House. These deals are meant to overcome the idiocy of the across-the-board cuts that were created by the sequester, which nobody in America understands, but are basically across-the-board cuts on spending that otherwise would be an investment in your family, maybe, or an investment in our military, agreed to as part of the fiscal cliff deal in the dark of night, voted on at 2 o'clock in the morning when nobody, literally nobody who had read that bill had actually read the bill. And ever since then, politicians in Washington have been making deals to try to overcome it. And when President Obama was president, this is how much money he was allowed to spend. Since Donald Trump has been president, this is the money that the Republicans have spent. The red is defense and the blue is non-defense. Under President Obama, the deals increased by an average of $33 billion above the sequester. The 2 deals under Donald Trump increased spending by $154 billion, 4 times as much. 4 times as much. At a moment when the president is saying our economy is the best it's ever been in American history. And the result of this is that under Donald Trump, the deficit has increased by 15% each year. The deficit just between last year and this year is up by 23% as a result of the Republican majority in the Senate and Donald Trump. We're on track to run $1 trillion deficits every year as far as the eye can see. That's after 10 years of economic growth and unemployment below 4%. At no time in our history have deficits been this large outside of a major war or a recession, which brings me to my second slide. Mr. President, this is the annual spending growth around here. This is the annual spending growth around here of defense and non-defense. It's both in here. Under President Obama, in his first term, the spending went up 3%. We were in the worst recession since the Great Depression. He had to pass the Recovery Act. That's in this number. That is in this number. It was at the depths of the worst recession since the Great Depression. 3 million Americans lost their homes. 9 million Americans lost their jobs. We had a 10% unemployment rate, Mr. President, not a 4%, not a 3 and change, but a 10%. In the name of fiscal responsibility, Republicans did nothing except berate the president for trying to save the economy, for what he was trying to do. I'll come to that in a moment. This includes the Recovery Act. Overall growth, annual spending growth, grew by 3% during President Obama's first term. It fell by 2% during President Obama's second term. It has gone up by 4% during Trump's first term. It has increased more under this Republican president. Admittedly, he's not a conservative. It has grown more under this Republican president than it did when President Obama was trying to save the economy during the worst recession since the Great Depression. This 3% number includes the Recovery Act. The Republicans are now growing government spending by more than that. By more than that. Here's what they said when they wouldn't lift a finger during the depths of the worst recession. Congressman Mike Pence said, before he was vice president, "We the people do not consent to runaway federal spending. We the people do not consent to the notion that we can borrow and spend and bail our way back to a growing America." He said that to a Tea Party rally here in Washington, D.C. that was here to stop runaway spending. Where are they today? It's worse today than it ever was under President Obama. Far worse, not a little bit worse, because you know what's not included on this slide? Are the tax cuts that have never paid for themselves and are not paying for themselves here. Donald Trump and the Republicans have created $2 trillion of deficit spending because of the tax cuts and $2 trillion of deficit spending because of the spending. By the way, they're not actually spending this money in a sense. They are borrowing all of it from our children. They have not paid for a dollar of it, not $1. They're borrowing it from the pages that are here. They're borrowing it from the children of cops, teachers, and firefighters. That's who they're borrowing it from to give tax cuts to rich people, to make our economic inequality greater. Congressman Mick Mulvaney, now the President's Chief of Staff, talking about the Obama administration's budget at the time. It's hard to explain how detached from reality that is, to think that the country can spend another $1.6 trillion when it doesn't have the means. It means either you haven't been paying attention or you don't care. He's the President's Chief of Staff. He's the President's budget director. If that was runaway spending, how is this not runaway spending? The junior senator from Texas said the debt is out of control and it is jeopardizing the future for our kids. I've got 2 little kids who are 4 and 2, he lectured the president, and the idea of handing them a $16 trillion debt, I think, is immoral. Really? What about $24 trillion? What about $30 trillion? Is that more moral than $16 trillion? Really? Former Speaker Paul Ryan, we will end up with a Greece-like situation on our hands. A debt crisis is coming to the country, he said. That's what he said here. Admittedly, he left in the middle of a government shutdown, never to come back to Washington, D.C., a fitting end to a decade of fiscal fights and shutdowns and government closures, all done in the name of fiscal responsibility, never actually achieving it, never, ever actually achieving it, only for the opportunity to spend like this. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard about this on this floor. The debt and deficit is just getting out of control, and the administration is still pumping through billions and trillions of new spending. Our debt is out of control. What was a fiscal challenge is now a fiscal crisis, said Paul Ryan. We cannot deny it. Instead, we must, as Americans, confront it responsibly, and that is exactly what the Republicans pledged to do. That is exactly what the Republicans pledged to do. They immobilized our government. They shut it down over and over and over again in the name of fiscal responsibility. No help to the economy or the next generation. That's the farthest thought from their mind. And after years of obstruction in the name of fiscal responsibility, they nominated Donald Trump, who promised during the campaign to deliver a giant, beautiful, massive tax cut, borrowed all the money for it from working people in this country. There was a mayor in Indiana who wrote a piece about that in the paper that I thought was so instructive. He said, that tax plan would be tantamount to my going to my city council and saying, I want to go borrow more money than we've ever borrowed before in the history of our city, of our town, and I'm not going to use it to invest in roads or bridges or the sewers or anything else. I'm just going to take the money we borrowed that our kids are going to have to give back, and I'm going to give it to the richest neighborhood in my town. He said they would ask, what have you been smoking? He promised to pass, quote, one of the largest increases in national defense spending in American history, and, quote, not touch Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. He said he would eliminate not only the deficit, this is Donald Trump, the candidate, who the Republicans voted for, who Fox News, in theory, the conservative channel, has supported like an organ of the state, with hosts who claim that they're fiscally responsible. He promised to eliminate not only the deficit, but the entire national debt, that immoral debt of $16 trillion that is now climbing to $30 trillion. And the way he was going to do that was by, quote, vigorously eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government, ending redundant government programs and growing the economy, as well as by, quote, renegotiating all of our debt deals. He hasn't renegotiated one. He spent more time failing to get a deal with the leader of North Korea than trying to address this challenge. Quote, Donald Trump said, it can be done. It will take place and it will go relatively quickly. If you have the right people, like in the agencies, and the various people that do the balancing, you can cut the numbers by 2 pennies. This is the President of the United States of America. You can cut the numbers by 2 pennies and 3 pennies and balance a budget quickly and have a stronger and better country. That is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. But it's no more ridiculous than the history of the Republican Party, the supposedly fiscally conservative party. What a joke! Going back to 2001, the last time we had a surplus in America, Bill Clinton was president. He was a Democrat. He had a $5 trillion projected surplus over the decade. Unimaginable today, but politicians like us were having discussions about what to do with the surplus, what to do with abundance, how to make Social Security solvent, how to give the middle class a real tax cut, not a fake tax cut that's masquerading, covering up the tax cut for rich people. But we did none of that. And instead, George Bush, who followed Bill Clinton, cut taxes in 2001. Almost all the benefit went to wealthy people. He cut taxes in 2003, and both times, just like Donald Trump said and the majority leader Mitch McConnell said, both times they said, oh, don't worry about it. They'll pay for themselves. A lie, a lie. And the numbers in the math. It's not about philosophy. This isn't about ideology. This is about the math. And everybody in America can see it because that's what produced the $16 trillion that Paul Ryan said was so immoral $8 trillion ago, on the way to $30 trillion in debt. And by the way, it's important to know that when this Congress voted for those tax cuts in 2003 that were not paid for, the money was all borrowed by the sons and daughters of working people in America. We had troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we didn't even have the decency, while we had people at war, to pay for those wars, or to say to the American people, we need to pay for those wars. No, we're not going to pay for those wars, and we're going to borrow the money from America to give tax cuts to rich people. And then President Bush, on top of that, seeking re-election, passed Medicare Part D, the drug program for seniors, paid for none of that either. Borrowed all that money from our children, all of it. And there's never been an effort to pay for it since. And then, because of their lax regulatory oversight of the housing market, the economy collapsed. The economy collapsed. And Barack Obama was handed not a $5 trillion surplus, but a $1.2 trillion deficit from the Republicans, from George Bush. And during the course of his presidency, we had to weather the worst recession since the Great Depression, and the worst it ever got around here was $1.5 trillion on the deficit, and the other side called him a Bolshevik and a socialist, and well-meaning people from all over Wall Street and other places came down here and said, fix the debt, fix the debt. Where are they today? Where are they today? And by the time he left, President Obama had cut the deficit by more than half. By more than half. Every one of these deals has been cut by Mitch McConnell. Every single one. So it didn't surprise me at all this week that he was reported in the Washington Post to have said to the president that, quote, no politician has ever lost an election spending more money. No politician has ever lost an election spending more money, said the Republican majority leader to the president. I can't think of a more Bolshevik statement than that, to use terms that the other side has been using for 10 years. I can't think of a more irresponsible position than that, when we are not in the depths of a recession, when 10 million people haven't lost their job, when the economy, according to the president, is the best economy we've ever had. This is the moment we should be securing our future. This is the moment we should be preparing for another foreign engagement. And because of these deals that have been led by Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader from Kentucky, when you add it all up, not only do we have this extraordinary deficit that we've never seen in the country's history, I ask indulgence for one additional minute, but...
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. But since 2001, we have cut taxes by $5 trillion. We borrowed all of that money from our children, and almost all the benefit went to the wealthiest people in America. We spent $5.6 trillion on wars in the Middle East. We didn't pay for a single dollar of it. That's $11 trillion and $12 trillion that we could have spent to fix every road and bridge in America, that could have fixed every single airport in America that needs it, that could have made Social Security solvent for my children's generation and for the other children of the people that came out here and said, we're here to immobilize a Democratic president in the name of fiscal responsibility. But now we know the level of their fiscal hypocrisy. It knows no end. And if there's one benefit of this, the American people are...
Gentleman's time has expired.
For the first time, I yield the floor.